Hello, welcome to another episode of Project GaitWay. Today, our lovely volunteer runway model is Lindsay. Don't know where Lindsay is from. I'm pretty sure she's currently living in a van. Love that van life. So she could be anywhere in the world. But Lindsay reports having some right inner knee pain when she sprints and sometimes when she squats. So we're here to take a look at how she's moving and standing, and if we can find any correlations in how she's moving and standing with her knee discomfort, and also for me to have some fun guessing at what past history may have led to her body moving the way it does today. So this is my first time watching this video and looking at her posture. We're going to be doing it, or I'm going to be doing it through the lens of my training in anatomy and motion using the AIM method. And hopefully this is interesting and valuable for you. So we're first going to look at her static posture. So this is just a couple of moments in time where Lindsay has stood for me from several views. So we're going to go to her back view. It's always hard to pinpoint exactly when is this their most relaxed stance. And to be honest, Lindsay, you went a little quickly through your stance from each view. So we're going to do the best we can. I think about theirs where we have a good back view. So what is one of the first thing that stands out? Well, to me, one of the first thing that stands out is this right lower leg. Whole leg, really. What you might be able to notice about the configuration of her right knee is it looks like her whole leg is a bit more internally rotated. In particular, we have some internal rotation in her femur. And I think it also looks like a bit of internal rotation in her tibia. That's harder to tell for me. But it looks like this knee is a little bit more locked back into an extension, so a bit more straight. And something that struck me, just watch this as she turns from the side to the back view. So I'm going to put it into like 1/8 of the speed and watch her right knee when she turns to the back view. Maybe 1/8 speed is too slow. Oh well. So watch that right knee. Right there. Do you see how she locks it back quite a bit? Let's see. Right there. Pop. And I wasn't sure if that was just part of her getting settled into her stance, but that right knee does lock back quite a bit. And the interesting thing about that, as it refers or as it relates to her having some right inner knee discomfort, is it's something you really don't want to see is an internally rotated femur on a hyperextended, or we don't know if it's hyperextended, but a more extended knee. This is not a configuration of bones that generally feels good. When the knee extends, what we'll want to see is the femur being drawn into an external rotation, but we do not have that going on. So there's one clue. Now, what else can we see? And as it relates to my little thought experiment of looking at the angles of those lines at the back of one's knee, I'm just really trying to understand what those lines mean. And what we're seeing is this line more flat across, more horizontal, and more prominent, it's more dark. Whereas this one, the angle of the line is a little more slanted like that, ever so slightly. Maybe not. These are things that I'm still looking at and trying to see if there is anything actually worth interpreting about them. Okay, let's take a look at her lower legs now, just the angle. Again, I'm seeing a bit more of a a slant out to the side through her lower leg here. Welcome to my world, Lindsay. Slanty right shin bones. So we call that a varus angle. And that is something that will happen with an extended knee, but it shouldn't be something we see with an internally rotated leg. So there's a little bit of discombobulation in that leg. What I also have a little bit of a sense of is that with this knee, the varus angle of the tibia slanted off to the right, I'm also seeing this whole thigh looks to be more to the left on top of her right tibia. So that's interesting. I don't know if it's more so that her tibia is veering off to the right, or if it's her femur that's sliding off to the left, but there's a little bit of a frontal plane alignment of her knee that might not be very happy. Looking up further in her body, well, I guess we also just want to take a look at her feet. Both feet are a little turned out, nothing too crazy there. I have this suspicion that her left rear foot is a little more everted, meaning more weight tipped to the inside of it. We'll have to see what that looks like in motion. Oops. That's not the thing I wanted to do. I wanted to zoom out. Okay. Oops. Wait for her arms to settle back. I don't know exactly where is her resting arm stance. Okay. I'm noticing her head just slightly turned to the right here. You can see more of her right ear, a bit more of her right mandible sticking out to the side. It doesn't really look like there's too much exaggerated with her pelvis or rib cage or spine in terms of a side bend or a rotation. So let's take a look at another camera angle and see what we can see. Where does she go from here? I'd like to see a front view. If I could be back to a front view. Oh, here we go. Okay, again, I'm pretty sure she says she spends about 2 seconds in her front view, so we're gonna have to try to pinpoint it where it looks most relaxed. I don't think we're gonna get there. That's okay. I don't want to watch too much of you walking. Just want to see standing. Okay, we'll say that that's probably as close. Wait for her knees to. There's this moment where her legs kind of relax. Let's see where that is. All right, we'll say that's the best that we got for her standing from the front view. Okay. I don't think she's completely relaxed though, because let's see on thingy. We can see her toes are kind of up. And interestingly, there's quite a bit of space between her big toe and second toe. I'm not sure what that's about. Especially on her right foot. Again, from the front view, there is the sense of her knee being more extended. You can see just a little bit more like her knee is pushed backwards behind her left one. I have this sense of something is different about her right leg and her left leg. The contour of her pelvis on the right looks quite different. The way this femur is sitting, I'm not sure exactly how to describe it, but there's something that's very different about it. The development of this like lateral glutes is a little bit greater than on her left side. So I wonder what that's about. That could be related to some frontal plane strategy when she's walking. the position of her leg. I want to go back to the back view again to double check her right leg alignment, but let's see her side view first. Oh, that was quick. Too quick. So you can pinpoint her standing in mostly relaxed state. Really interesting people's perception of how long is long enough. Quick side story. I remember doing a workshop once, and in it, we were talking about time, which is a mindfuck. And we were talking about how everyone perceives time passing so differently. So we did this experiment where everyone was standing with our eyes closed, and our facilitator said, in your mind, count to 60 seconds and sit down when you get to 60, just to see when everybody got to 60 seconds in their own count. And some people sat down before 60 seconds. Most people more or less sat down around 60 seconds. I forget what I was, but there are some people that were standing there for like 3 minutes. It was crazy. So anyway, time. Let's look at the side view. So, oh, I did it again. I'm so sorry. This video is probably going to take longer than it's too because of all the talking. Okay, we'll say that that's where she is. Okay. Again, her toes never fully rest on the floor. Both legs do look a little like her knees are locked backwards. I have the sense of her head being a little forwards. Typical human. You might be seeing a little bit of an anterior pelvis tilt, but this might be like just her being perfect. I mean, just because someone has a bit of an anterior tilt, it doesn't mean there's anything wrong with that. We have to see if it all plays out in motion, if it is actually causing her some trouble. Her spine does look quite flat, though, not a lot of flexion in her thoracics. Okay, so yeah, I think this is what I was seeing from the front view that I'm now able to actually understand from the back view. So when I was saying that this femur looks more shifted to the left, I think what I'm seeing is the bottom of the femur like that, and the top of the femur is more up and to the left. So there's a bit of a tilt out to the side with that femur. So what I see that as is the femur in the acetabulum of the pelvis is more in an adducted position. So if this has showed up in another video as well, if you want to go back and watch, I forget what episode it is, but it's happened several times. So we're seeing her right leg on more of an angle like that, and her left leg more like that. That's a huge exaggeration, but so this tipping in the socket, it looks like, of her actual femur, because I don't know if she's actually shifted with her hips more over to that side. It kind of looks like she might be. She might have her pelvis more over her right foot, but more so it looks like the angle of her leg is more adducted. So a bit more adducted, internally rotated with an extended knee. That's a recipe for something weird. Okay, let's just look at quickly her other side view. I think she's again not gonna, oh, come on. Coach Isaiah, I love you, but I just can't scroll accurately. Okay, so she never quite gets settled into her forefeet. That's something that, even though we can't see exactly how she's resting in her feet, she never really wants to get her toes on the ground. So I'm suspecting she might be quite a bit back in her heels. This is something common to see if we have a person with a little bit of a pelvis anteriorly tilted and extended knees. You can try this. Do an anterior pelvis tilt and extend your knees as you do this, and you'll see that your weight does go back into your heels. If you were to do an anterior tilt and your knees were to flex, it should put your weight in your forefeet. So we might be seeing that actually this relationship between her pelvis being anteriorly tilted and her knees being more extended, that might be a little bit of an issue. And now something that's also worth noting is that in every single one of her angles, her right foot is slightly in front of her left, which is interesting because if you were to take a step forwards on your right leg and fully weight bear into it, we would want to have the bad drawing of a leg. You'd want to see a bent knee is what I'm trying to get at. This is supposed to be a bent knee right here. So putting your foot forward and standing on it in gait should result in a bent knee. But here we have her foot forward with an extended knee. So Lindsay, it's not too surprising that there are some weird things you're noticing about your right knee. I'm very curious if it actually can flex cleanly when you're walking, and what does it look like when you have your right leg forward versus your left leg forward? I suspect that we'll see some discombobulation regardless of which leg is forward, but let's find out. So let's go into a full speed walk. She doesn't have much space, so hopefully she does many laps here. Okay, there's looks like a bit of a twist of her pelvis to the right as she's walking. Yeah, when she pushes off her left leg, yeah, going from the beginning again. Yeah, she pushes off her left leg and here's her posture. So let's speed that up and go through gait. She pushes off her left leg and her pelvis rotates to the right, which is interesting. Let's watch that again. Also seeing her rib cage rotating to the right a little bit more. And I think I'm seeing something interesting with her pelvis hiking in the frontal plane, more so on the right. I have the sense that she's not really flexing through her right hip very much, like just not organized on that right leg. Okay, so I'm annoyed with restarting this and stopping it. So we're gonna just go into slow-mo. So here we go. We'll start with her right herb swing. I mean, there's really not much you can say from the first phase until you compare it with the rest of the phases and her other side. But there are some things that look disorganized here. The hike in the pelvis, which is not ideal in a mid stance. Seems to be there's this bend, this rotation to the right in her torso. Which continues all the way up into her head. So her skull is rotating right, rib cage is rotating right, and does it look like her pelvis is rotating right, like we saw in her full speed? Harder to tell, but I want to say that pretty much everything starts to rotate to the right. Now there should be differentiation between rotations of the pelvis, rib cage, and skull. This is our cogs in the transverse plane that we talk about in anatomy and motion, which means pelvis and skull and rib cage should be not all going the same direction when we walk. There should always be some differentiation between them. All right, let's see what happens when she goes into right heel strike. Okay, so we still have the same sort of off to the right upper body. There's something interesting with her spine right here. The little bit of it we can see peeking out right here. It's pretty straight there, it looks like. And then it kind of, I want to say we're seeing a bit of a left lateral flexion in the lumbars there. We're going to have to confirm that. And again, it's a little bit of a distorted view on the screen here. Not super great resolution. That's part of the fun of it. So how is it that we get the sense of a left lateral flexion in the lumbars, but what looks like a right lateral flexion in the thoracics? And I believe there's a little bit of a shift, a shearing happening with the rib cage to the left here. And that shearing left with the rib cage will give us this kind of shape. I'm not sure if that's true. I'm looking like it might not be. I don't know. We're going to have to find out. Happy to put a question mark on that for now. But there does seem to be these little wrinkles in that side of her shirt there, which are showing us there is a bit of a lateral flexion to the right, some shortening through this side here. Okay, landing on her foot doesn't look super exciting right now. Nothing much I really want to say, but what should be happening, the intention of heel strike, is the mass of her body is beginning to get onto her right foot, and it doesn't really look like her pelvis goes with her this way very much. Let's see how she fully weight bears as her foot goes into pronation on the right. So we have her right foot getting into pronation. This is where we ought to see her knee flexing. So I'm very curious to see, does her knee flex? And it's hard to tell from this view, and we'll have to compare it to her left leg. But overall, this doesn't look like there's anything really chaotic happening. She looks to be pretty organized, at least from this view. We're seeing some things that are what we want to have happening in a right leg forward. We're seeing her pelvis hike a little bit. We're seeing her spine laterally flex to the right a little bit. We're even seeing her skull oppose, meaning that she has this right ear up a little bit higher. So she's got her frontal plane cogs in order. Which is great. So I don't really know what to say about this. Even her back foot is actually on the floor. Very rare to see that. Very interesting. So we know there's some stuff that's a little disorganized on this leg, but somehow it looks pretty nice. So let's see if the disorganization shows up in a different phase. So now we're in our right mid stance. This is also not looking too crazy. Everything's quite quiet. We watch as she goes from her pronated foot into her what is supposed to be a supinating right foot. It doesn't really supinate, so we can say that this leg or that foot is not really supinating. And in fact, her pelvis continues to hike more on the right side. Now we know that this knee likes to hyperextend, or we think it does anyway, but does it get to that hyperextension here? Not sure if that knee is extending. What did it look like when she was in her left stance? So this left stance actually looks a bit more disorganized than her right one. She looks more inverted in that rear foot on the left. She looks more hiked in her pelvis on the left compared to here. Now, there's less movement in this right foot. I'm curious to see from a front view if there's any different information we can get. What seems to be consistent is there's this lateral flexion through her spine to the right, which was also showing up here. She starts to get into that right rotation and lateral flexion here and continues to hold it. She gets pretty more or less leveled out, not leveled out, but organized here. Keeps mostly the same shape here. Let's see how she gets into her left heel strike. And she is still holding that spine lateral flexion to the right. Does her pelvis go to the left? Not really. We put her into left foot pronation. Okay, so this is where we start to see some wonkiness in her right leg. That was different than her left leg. So if we've correctly pinpointed where her left foot is pronated fully, which is hard to tell here, but I'm going to guess it's right about there. Compared to her left leg back, this knee is quite a bit more flexed. And she's missing this contact with her ball of her foot on the floor. So that's not as good of a supination on the left leg. Remember how when she was showing us her standing posture, her right leg was always forward? So it's interesting that we're seeing more mechanical distortion happening with her leg back. She might not really know what it means to get her right leg back. So immediately I want to ask here, can your right hip extend, Lindsay? Extension meaning your leg is behind you, your pelvis is traveling forward and you're getting some opening in the front of your hip, like a hip flexor stretch. And we're still seeing this configuration of the rib cage being off to the right of her pelvis. So that is a pretty consistent thing for her. Pelvis, or rather rib cage being towards the right side of her body more. And then we're here in what looks like this kind of discombobulated looking left stance. So it's almost as if we could ask the question, is there something she's avoiding about her left leg in her injury history? Now, remember, she didn't tell us whether or not she actually had an accident with her right knee. All we know is that currently her right knee is what's giving her some discomfort when she seems to bend it, sprinting, squatting. Now, it could be quite possible that the way her body has adapted is the result of something has happened on the left, and now there's this lean away from it through her torso. We don't know. But she does seem to look more organized with her right leg forward phases than with her standing on her left leg forward phases. So that makes me curious about this left leg. Let's watch her from the front view. See what else we can see. So we'll go into, I think we're going to see some interesting stuff from the front, especially with her toes, because remember, her toes never really got on the ground. So here is we're going to start with a right leg forward pronation of the foot so we can see what's happening there. I wonder if we can get her 1 footstep closer. No, that's going to be the best one. Okay, we'll go back to, come on. Looking for her toes on the right foot to get on the ground. And it looks like there. So there's still that sense of none of her toes really on the floor, which is very interesting. If you can kind of see, there's this increased sense of a crease in her hip between her pelvis and her femur. Her pelvis seems to be rotating towards her femur and closing the space here. So we were talking before about, can your right hip extend? That would mean opening up this space here. And it looks like it gets kind of squashed by her pelvis rotating to the right into her right leg. So we might have a bit of a hip that's internally rotated, flexed. And just look at the angle of her femur, that adduction angle that we saw. Let's see if that's the same as on her left leg. So take a step on the left. Just want to look at her knees for a sec as she does her, yeah. There's little bits that keep catching my eye as I do these videos, and one of them that's been standing out is just how much here one's knee kicks into extension. And it looks like on her right leg, just look at the amount of extension her knee kicks into. And then on her left leg, it doesn't look like it's as much of a extension. I know I'm getting off track with this tangent. Let's watch it a bit slower. Kick and kick. Well, both of them kind of do it. But to me, that looks like just a little bit more of an extension than on the left leg. There, just doesn't it look like, oh, I shouldn't lead you and say, doesn't it look like? That's what a lawyer would do. Isn't it true? To me, it looks like her knee is a bit more extended in that particular moment than here, but that bears questioning. There's also this sense of her femur being more externally rotated here compared to here. Her kneecap's pointing towards the side a bit more compared to here. Her kneecap is pointing more forward. So there is again this sense of her leg being internally rotated with a pelvis that's rotating towards it. So we call that like a double internal rotation of that hip, which doesn't always feel good in that groin area. So really interested in seeing what like a hip flexor stretch looks like or feels like for her. So we were going to look at her left pronation of the foot. Left leg forward discombobulation. It really looks like her toes don't want to go on the ground. That's happening on both sides. So when there's something similar both sides, it leads me to want to investigate central structures above. So for example, pelvis, rib cage, spine, jaw, head. Are there limitations in sagittal plane motion of any of those structures? So toes should go on the ground when the foot pronates. Toes going on the ground, you could call that a plantar flexion generally of all the toes. That should happen when the pelvis does an anterior tilt. Now I remarked, gotta stop saying we, it just feels more inclusive and I wanna include you. It looked like her pelvis had more of an anterior tilt, but we're seeing toes that are extending up, which ought to happen with a supination of the feet and a posterior tilt to the pelvis. So there might be a little bit of a discombobulation between pelvis and toes. An exchange there. Can she posteriorly tilt her pelvis? I would want to know that. Posterior tilt of the pelvis would also help her to extend and externally rotate. Oops. Externally rotate and abduct that hip with a posterior tilt of the pelvis. So whoops, that says pelvis, not pelvis. So what I want to kind of do as a further assessment is just put Lindsay with her left leg back and say, hey, can you posterior tilt your pelvis and do all those mechanics happen in your left leg? When you posterior tilt, do you get that external rotation in the femur? Does it abduct? Does your hip extend? And can your knee stay straight while you do that too? Essentially, can this back leg supinate? So anyway, we're looking at her front leg now. Just need to double check something on her right side. Okay. So I don't know what this means because it's still something I'm investigating. But if you look at the muscle tone in her thigh on the right, just notice what you see. Because we're going to compare it to the left. Left foot forward and she's on it. And look at the muscle tone in her lateral quads here. It just looks more full, doesn't it? Now, I don't really know what that means, other than those muscles are getting some kind of stimulus to develop more. When do the lateral quads get the most stimulus? Well, quads generally are going to get the most load through them when the knee is bending. There's probably more we could say about transverse plane. This leg does look to be more externally rotated, so there could be something about this muscle development here that's a result or related to her leg being more externally rotated on the left. So I'm not sure if this tone in her leg is the result of her standing more on her left leg generally, like center of mass shifted left more, or is it a result of the difference in rotation through her hips and the difference in the flexion and extension of her knees, this knee potentially being the one that has more flexion, which would result in more eccentric loading through the quads there. Not sure. This is something that would be very interesting to investigate more, but there's a difference in how her quads have developed, and that shit don't happen overnight. That's like the result of some years of a body pattern. Now, one more thing I want to look at, and then maybe we'll wrap this video up, is what her pelvis does in terms of a shift during her swing through. So her right leg swings through, does her pelvis shift onto her right leg, and does her pelvis shift to the left? It doesn't really look like it shifts to the left as much. It looks like she's caught in this right hip and she's not permitted to get off of it. And even when she does, her body is still leaning to the right. So it's like there's this force holding her over here. It's a little bit stuck in this hip. And her body wants to go off to the right rotation-wise. So if she's got a right rotation, what it looks like in her spine, and a right rotation in her pelvis, then we're seeing her spine is struggling to actually rotate at all. It's like a neutral spine that just faces right and faces left, but there isn't articular rotation actually in her spine. Now, we didn't really take a significant look at her upper body, and it might be there's some important clues in her upper body, but I got sucked into her lower body. But nothing really stands out significantly to me. Maybe my brain's just getting tired now. I'll take one quick look at her head through all the phases. So interestingly here, we can see a little bit of a tilt of her head towards her left. That's not really where you want your head to be. In this pronation of the foot phase on the left, we would want to see her skull. This is an exaggeration, but laterally flexing away from that leg to the right. Does she get her head? Both sides. I don't know if her skull is really coordinating with her body that much. Tough to say. Tough to say. Tough to say, I think, because my brain is starting to turn off. I've used all my mental resources looking at her lower body. But as a starting point, because really all we can get, not all we can get, but what is the most helpful to get from this gait video is a starting point of investigation. Not all the answers are here, just a lot of questions and a lot of refinement in what we assess next. And I am curious, standouty things for me. On both feet, her toes don't go down. So I want to know, what is the sagittal plane motion like of her pelvis? Her spine, from, if you want to go back to when she was doing her standing posture. Oh, perfect. Remember here how it looks like her spine is quite flat, meaning she doesn't have a lot of flexion. It looks like there's a bit of extension here, then it's just flat all the way up with a bit of a head forward. So can she actually move her spine into flexion? Can she flex her lumbars? Can she posterior tilt her pelvis? If there is anything going on here that is lacking movement, it might be making these toes not able to get on the ground just because of the relationship we see in motion between a pelvis and feet, which, if you want to learn more about anatomy in motion, is an amazing body of work to study that correlates what the feet do with what the rest of the body does. The next thing that I'm really interested in, this angle of her leg, which looks to be an adduction, and then that rotation to the right of her pelvis that never goes left. And that leg that's internally rotated, it looks like she's stuck in this right hip. Stuck adducted, internally rotated, and a bit flexed in that right hip. So a little bit of a recipe for some compression. So can she get out of that hip is the question. Can she extend her right hip? Because when she gets into what should be a hip extension, which I will show you again here. So with her left leg forward, and she's meant to have an extended hip, we see it's flexed hip instead with the knee flexed. So I wonder how much of her issue with her knee is this knee isn't getting into extension when it ought to. When it's behind her here, that's when we ought to see it extending with the femur externally rotating. Oops, extension, external rotation, but she's got instead, she's got an internal rotation and a flexion. The blue is what she's currently got going on. So it might be here is a good place to start a reorganization process. Why is this happening? I mean, the game is to guess what happened to this body. I want to guess something about her left leg. I mean, there could be, if we were going to wildly speculate, there might have been some kind of accident that compressed the right side of her body, compressed her right hip. Think about like falling and landing on a side, or getting in a car accident, getting hit in the right side. I mean, that could be viable. That something actually happened there. That was like an actual force that came into the body to compress things the way they are. But also we could be seeing that there's something that's happened to this left leg. Her past an ankle sprain. We did see that this rear foot on the left is a bit more everted, which can sometimes be how a ankle adapts after a sprain to lock it down so it doesn't sprain again, just getting the weight to roll more inside. Not sure. Perhaps this tendency to have this externally rotated leg here has been there for a while. Whatever this pattern is of the pelvis and everything being to the right, maybe that's something that we don't know where it came from, but that's been a long-standing pattern, and it's resulting in some discomfort somewhere in her left leg. Like it could very well be that there's also this hip being very externally rotated. It's just not something that's easy to get your weight into, just the way it's set up mechanically. I'm not sure, but I'm going to guess, because I said I'm going to guess something, either some kind of accident with some force, like a car accident, fell off your bike, I don't know, did something that compressed this right hip, or something happened like a sprain or a strain in a muscle or an ankle on the left side that now is being avoided with this big twisty thing through the body and the leaning to the right through the body. And where I would want to begin is just assessing, can this right leg properly supinate and start to extend? And then she can start to access these left leg forward phases of gait. So that's all I have to say about that before I continue rambling on. Gotta get on with my day. Thank you, Lindsay, for being our lovely model. Please let us know if you want to pop some thoughts into the comments of this video. What's actually happening in your history? I'm pretty curious. Does any of this resonate with you in your lived experience in your body? Let us know. And anyone else, if you have anything to say, comments, questions, observations, put them in the comments of this video as well. Thanks for watching this episode of Project GaitWay. If you enjoyed it, let me know. Share with a friend who is a gait nerd as well. Let's have some fun. geeking out on people's bodies walking together. And if you'd like to learn more about anatomy in motion, which is the lens through which I do all of these videos, definitely check out some online courses or in-person courses. Go to www.findingcentre, center with an R-E, not an E-R, centre, .co.uk, and look for upcoming courses and things. That's all for now. Have a great day and be good to your body.